Hello and welcome to part 2 of my marching snare drum technique video series. In this video, we're going to be discussing motion as well as stroke type. So a lot of things will be covered here, but we're actually going to start playing the instrument. So the first thing that we're going to do is grab our sticks and we're going to set up with our grip and set up to the drum that we covered in video number 1. If you have not watched part 1, be sure to check that out before diving into this stuff. But essentially we're gonna set that up and we're gonna start with our motion. So there's 3 big things that we can use to get motion out of the stick. The first thing that we're gonna talk about and the biggest thing that we need to be able to know how to use is our wrist, right? So pivoting from the wrist right here, that's our wrist motion. My fingers don't open up, my arm doesn't come up. I just move right here from the wrist. It causes this to flex, right? And then the other motion is our finger motion. So if I use my fingers, I'm opening and closing them, and then the stick stays in the fingers, right? And I just pull them back in, right? To where my fingers meet my hand. And I can keep my arm and wrist still while doing that. And then we have arm motion. So there's a couple different types of arm motion. There's your standard arm motion where you pivot from the elbow and it comes up like this. And then if you go really big, you can pivot from the elbow and then also pivot here from the shoulder and make that bend if you're trying to go for all the way up. But those are the 3 big things that we're going to talk about. And I always like to discuss them in percentages, right? So in the beginning, we're going to try to focus on getting as much wrist as possible. It probably won't be like 100% if we're playing like bigger dynamics. But here's what we're going to do. So we're going to set up our drum head like so, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring the sticks up all the way until they're vertical. So in order to get there, we're gonna try to use as much wrist as possible at this point. Once you get to a point where you notice that you have a lot of tension going on, then you're going to implement a little bit of arm as well to help you achieve that vertical stick height. But notice my sticks are still like down here, pretty close to the drum. They're not like up here or anything like that. So it just depends on where you're at in terms of wrist flexibility. For me, I can turn my wrist all the way up just fine without using any arm. I do feel a little bit of tension in the right wrist especially. So I want to avoid that by just adding a smidge of arm motion as well, but definitely be working to increase the flexibility of those wrists so we can achieve that motion and get as much out of it as possible. Wrist is just the biggest motion that is neglected, so it's the one that we need to focus on the most in the beginning, especially when we're talking about stroke types. So in terms of our pathway, so stick pathway is huge, something I cover and am very passionate about for sure, because I think it makes a huge difference in people's sound. And again, this is one of those things that like if you don't do it right, you're just doing yourself a disservice, because you have everything, you can have everything else right, but if your stick path is wrong, it's gonna make you sound not good, right? So I'm turned here just so you can see where I'm at. So obviously I set up with my right hand at this angle normally. I'm just turning to where the stick is facing the camera directly to show you that my stick path, whenever it comes up, it always goes up and out at the angle, right? So as you see my stick come up like this, as I turn, it's gonna go up and out. And if I kept going all the way up, it would go in that direction. And then it comes back down. I'm turning with the wrist to start and then slowly implementing arm as I go, starting by pivoting the elbow, then pivoting the shoulder to where I'm straight. And then I come back down the exact same way I came up. So I don't turn my wrist until I get to the bottom, but I need to make sure that I bring my arm all the way back down, because if I don't bring it all the way back down, I turn the wrist too early, I'm gonna hit like this and we're not gonna have that low taper position that we discussed before. So we need to make sure that we have that, but we stay in that pathway. So this is what it looks like when I'm straight on like this. It goes up and out in that direction, right? And it's the same thing in the left hand. So if I showed you from the side, it would look like this, up and out. I implement the arm, and then from this perspective, it looks like this. To where if I do both at the same time, it's symmetrical, right? Both of them are moving together in the same location, and then I come back down The same way, making sure I return to the taper position. So that right hand wrist motion is going to be like this, engaging this. With our left hand, it's gonna be more of a rotation technique. So similar to like bass drum rotation technique. For anybody who has done that, that'll definitely help you out. But like we discussed in the last video, when we just did this before we added our fingers to the stick, that's gonna be our method of moving. So it's just gonna be this rotation, like turning a doorknob, right? That's gonna be our motion. So doing this, or the wiggity wiggity, right? So get used to this motion and this quickness and this twitch in the left hand, and that's gonna help us move faster and more efficiently. So I twist like that, I rotate. Be sure, this is a common tendency with this rotation technique. A lot of people, when they start doing this, when they start to rotate up, they actually pull their hand down like this to where it like goes below the rim, and they come back up. They're like doing this over and over again. That's just kind of a waste of energy by doing this, and it doesn't get you the same height, right? Because we're changing like the taper. I mean, it's going like below the rim, yeah? So you need to make sure that everything that you're doing is going up and out in the pathway of the stick. Your hand never moves like downward until you get to the top, and then you come back down, right? For our instance right now, we're just gonna go to the up position. We're gonna call the up position with our vertical stick height right here, making sure both hands are the same, both beads are the same distance, trying to be symmetrical. And then, like at first, I always just like to practice that motion a couple times, making sure that I always return to that same spot that we worked on in the first video, because we don't want to lose that at all. We wanna make sure it stays the same. So that essentially covers our motion, right? So we have arm motion, wrist motion, finger motion, and then we have to think about our stick pathways, and we'll talk about specific types of percentages of those 3 different motions dependent on the music we're playing. In the beginning with foundational playing, we're always gonna focus on our wrist motion, implementing a little bit of arm with those bigger figures. Cool. The next thing that we're going to discuss is stroke types. Cool. So the first stroke type we're going to discuss is the full stroke, or the rebound stroke. I mean, each stroke rebounds, but some people refer to it as the rebound stroke. They all rebound. So we start here. We start up in the up position, and then we basically throw the stick down at the drum head and allow it to return here. We want to make this happen as quick as possible, like in the blink of an eye. Boom. I'm right back here where I started. And the faster we move the stick, that's what we call velocity, right? So we want to have maximum velocity all the time, as much velocity as we can possibly get. So a lot of people confuse this, but velocity has nothing to do with strength. You're not going to be able to like muscle the stick in there and get the sound that we want. In fact, muscles are just going to get in the way of the resonance that we want when trying to play at high velocity. It's just going to slow us down. For people who are like weak and scrawny, such as myself, it's easy for me to move fast and get a high rate of velocity all the time. So like I said, we set here. I always like to set in the like playing position before I go to the up position, just to make sure I don't do anything weird just by setting up like that. So I go here, I turn up to the up position, wrist, slight arm at the end, and then I throw the stick down. It's gonna pop back up on its own because of how quickly we're throwing it down. We're gonna get a ton of response from the drum head, assuming we don't squeeze our fingers, right? So if I do squeeze my fingers, then notice that the bead stops down at the drum head. And then I have to pull the stick back up. Whenever I keep my hand open and throw it down fast, I don't have to pull the stick up at all. I don't do that, right? So don't add any unnecessary pressure. Some people will do this, they'll like cheat it. They'll like throw it down, squeeze it for a second, and then pull it back up, like this. That's not a full stroke, right? You see the bead stopping down at the drum head. It needs to be a continuous motion, continuous speed of motion, right? We don't want to slow it down after we hit the drum head and pull it back up. It starts here, stops here. Open hand, relaxed, quick. It's about the quickness of motion. It does not have to do with strength, it has to do with how quick you can rotate, right? And that has to do with the flexibility that we have in our wrists. And again, it's the same thing for the left hand, so I'll go ahead and demonstrate that as well. With the left hand, it's just this rotation that we've been talking about. You throw it down quick, pops back up on its own. That's the full stroke. You can play a full stroke at any height. I just demonstrated it in the up position because I think that's a good place to start, but you could also do full strokes here. As I get lower, I need to make sure that I'm still using the same rate of velocity. We're going to use the same rate of velocity at each height. There are specific instances in music where you could potentially use a weaker or slower velocity to change your touch on the instrument, but typically in marching percussion, it just adds too many variables when trying to play amongst a line. So some more advanced groups do dabble in that a little bit, but that's not something that I'm going to be discussing. So for now, we want to make sure that we have the same amount of velocity at each height. That leads me into the next stroke type that I want to discuss, which is the tap stroke. So the tap stroke is going to be in the down position. So if I go to my playing position, slightly angled down, to get to my down position, all I do is I come up to where my sticks are horizontal, right? So I just slightly rotate my wrist up like this. This is the down position, and typically people's lowest dynamic that they will play at. From here, I just play a full stroke. So I move as quick as I can. Start here, stop here, blink of an eye. Stay loose, turn quick. When I'm playing down here, I'm not using any arm motion. I'm just using my wrist. Left hand. And a lot of people, when they do this, they, again, don't rebound, but especially at the low height, right? This one, pretty obvious. You can see that it's not rebounding. With this one, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to get down because there's less distance between the stick, the beat of the stick and the drum head. So it's easier to get away with not rebounding it like that as opposed to, right? You want to get back to the top as quick as possible to where you almost have time to like wait there until you have to go down again, to where it's not like a consistent, constant motion unless you're playing like faster. Right? But in order to play as fast as possible and we're downstroking and we're like squeezing and opening, squeezing and opening, squeezing and opening, it's only gonna slow us down and restrain us and get a worse sound. So with our tap strokes, they are in fact full strokes. The only reason we refer to them as tap strokes is just because within context of music, we typically play more taps than we do accents, right? So taps are something that are talked about a lot. So we kind of refer to it as its own stroke type to make sure that we can kind of focus on it and get some work in on it. Cool. So I consider those the easiest two because they start and stop in the same place. The two that are more, I would say, are typically more difficult to achieve are the downstroke and the upstroke. So we're going to talk about the downstroke first. So the downstroke is where we end lower than where we started. So I'm going to just do an example of this I'm going to start in the up position and then I'm going to end in the down position. I'm not going to end in the playing position. I'm going to end in the down position. So I start up here. And then I end in the down position, as I said. So there are multiple ways that you can make this happen. Everybody's first thought is always to just squeeze the stick, because if I start here and I throw it down and I squeeze it, I can force the beat to stop down here at the drum head super well. And it looks good, right? The problem is it doesn't sound good. Sound is always going to be more important and take priority over how something looks. So in order to get the sound that we want, we need to make sure that we're not squeezing the stick, but we're stopping it down by not allowing our wrist to turn back up. If I throw the stick down and then after it hits the drum head, I just make sure that my wrist doesn't come back up. It wants to come back up after it hits the drum and gets that rebound, right? And in the full stroke, we let it. For the downstroke, we just don't allow it to do that. We just keep it flat. And then since our hand is on top of the stick, stick, the weight of our hand is gonna stop the stick and not allow it to rebound. And you'll notice that because that's more loose, because that's more open, you're gonna see the bead, you might have already noticed it, but you can kind of see the bead jiggle as it hits the drum head. That jiggle just shows that you're relaxed, and it kind of takes a second for it to get back to that down position at the end, but it sounds way better, right? So with the squeeze one, yeah, you can make it look better and stop immediately, but it's not worth it with the sound. So listen to the difference in sound between these two. You're gonna hear the squeezed one, like we talked about, it's gonna be lower in pitch, and the open one is gonna be higher in pitch. Right? And the purpose of that is we want the full stroke and the downstroke to sound the exact same because they're played from the same height. If you play a note from the same height, if you just have like two accents in a row at the same dynamic, same height, then they should sound the same, right? You wouldn't want them to sound different. That wouldn't make any sense. So it wouldn't make any sense to play open and then squeeze and get two different sounds. So we need to be open, open. So I like to play those two together just to make sure that my downstrokes are open. So play the full stroke into the downstroke, it should sound the exact same if you're staying relaxed. This is what it sounds like if you squeeze it. Right, you hear that difference? So we need to make sure it's open, and it's always good to practice playing our downstrokes with our full stroke before them and just use our ears to listen to make sure it sounds the same. All of this is, I demonstrated all that on the right hand, but it's the exact same idea on the left hand. It's a little bit more difficult on the left hand because our right hand is definitely like way on top of the stick. With our left hand, it's just like we got, you know, a couple fingers underneath here. So big thing to make sure that our setup is good, like we talked about before. But yeah, our left hand should still be on top of the stick. We should still be able to stop it down without allowing our rotation to kick back up. Yeah, just keep this relaxed. Keep the weight down without squeezing. You'll still get that jiggle, right? Cool. And then I demonstrated that, like I said, by going to the up position to the down position, but it could be from any place. So I could go from here to here, and that's a downstroke. Anytime it stops lower than where it starts is a downstroke. I could go from here to here, it's a downstroke. Here to here, technically a downstroke, yeah? The last stroke type, the final stroke type, is the upstroke. The upstroke is just where we're gonna end higher than where we started. I like to, like I said, display this in the extreme. So we're gonna go from the down position, not the playing position, the down position, to the up position. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna play just like a tap stroke, like we normally would, but then after we rebound off the drum head, we're going to activate our wrist motion and turn it up. So it's very similar to a tap stroke, right? So when we play the tap, we just play a full stroke, allow it to rebound. We're just adding this at the end of it, and it happens continuously. So that's what happens all together. Right? So just be sure that the stick hits the drum head before you try to bring it back up. Because if you try to anticipate this up motion too early, you're gonna try to like hit the drum like harder because you're just like, I gotta get it back up there, right? So hit the drum first, think about playing a tap, and then add that extra lift at the end with the wrist. So again, play these two together. Play your tap into your upstroke and make sure they sound the same. If you try to over exaggerate and anticipate that up motion too early, you're gonna get two different sounds like this. If you do it correctly, you'll get two of the same sound. And you'll still end up here. You just have to move this quickly. Just like we talked about with moving down quickly for velocity, when you're doing up motions, you have to move up quickly with this rotation. Just imagine like you're trying to hit something up here. Because better we're able to make that motion happen, the quicker we're able to make it happen, it's just gonna make it easier to play things faster and with higher quality that have upstroke motions involved within them. And again, just like the right hand, left hand is the same. Tap into up, stay relaxed, don't squeeze. Rotate quickly to come up after you hit the drum head, not before. Excellent. So that's all for stroke types that we are going to utilize, and most people like to play them together. As you probably know, the full down tap up exercise is where you put all four of those together. So you start in the up position, you play full down tap up. Whenever you play this exercise, you need to make sure that you don't have 4 different sounds, but you just have 2, right? We already discussed that our full stroke and our downstroke sound the same, as well as our tap stroke and our upstroke sound the same. So if you have 4 different sounds, you're not playing the exercise correctly. There's 2 different dynamics because there's 2 different stick heights that we're playing. Don't allow the motion after you hit the drum head to affect the sound when you hit the drum head, right? So hit the drum head, and then for the upstrokes and downstrokes, change your motion, yeah? But not before, do not anticipate that. So this is kind of what that would sound like. So you can do that at a variety of different tempos, play a variety of different rhythms, and then it's always good to practice combining the hands as well. So doing full, down, tap, tap, up, to make sure that both hands are doing the same thing. And the thing is, a lot of people work on full down, tap up just on individual hands, and then when they try to play like 16th note, triplet, 8th note triplet, whatever, passages like that where they put the hands together, they kind of lose the quickness of those stroke motions. So make sure, even when you put the hands together, the full strokes are still fast on both hands. The downstrokes are still relaxed at the bottom. Tap strokes are still rebounding and have volume behind them, full velocity, even though it's low. And the upstrokes, we're not putting anything extra into it, and then we're just rotating up quickly. Right? That's kind of the idea when we put them together, and obviously once you put it like into faster music, we still need to make sure that we have that foundation there, and that stuff is going to be easier to play. You're going to be able to play it faster. It's going to sound a lot better. So we need to make sure that we have that the whole time. Theoretically, if you can like execute all 4 of these stroke types super well, you can like play anything, right? That's the idea. Obviously there's more to it than that, but that is the foundation behind it. And working on stroke types is something that every drummer needs to do at every level. Oftentimes the biggest things that hold us back are just poor upstrokes, downstrokes, being tense on full strokes, all that type of stuff. So really take that stuff to heart. It's really big in playing marching snare drum and with what we do. So I think that concludes part 2 of this video series. As I said at the end of last one, ask me any questions that you may have so I can clarify things, discuss things, always open to doing so. But yeah, that's it. So thank you for watching. Much love.